1, 2, 3, let's go.
Wednesday afternoon, hoping you will tune into our show.
I really don't know, but our brains are an incredible thing, and it's not something we can ever really understand, of course. The first thing that we do know, and this is where we're coming back to the subject matter, is that consciousness actually has very little to do with the overall workings of the brain. Most of it is going on, if you like, unknown to us, making decisions which never even come to the conscious level. The conscious you, the conscious me, the I that flickers when we wake up in the morning and we come into consciousness. The brain has been operating, looking after the system, the ship, if you like, all through the night, 24/7, 365 or 6 days a year. It's a bit like maybe a stowaway on a big, huge Atlantic steamship. The stowaway claims credit for the journey, but actually, without acknowledging the massive engineering enterprise that's going on underfoot. And that's kind of our consciousness. The brain, the consciousness is pretty much the smallest part of the brain activities. So we are very limited to know quite what it is about. We think we're controlling ourselves. We talked before, you and I, Cuz, about free will. And there's a lot of thinking that because the brain actually makes most decisions which never come to the surface. For example, it will make a decision if we find somebody attractive, if we don't like somebody, if we like a particular colour. We suddenly think, oh, I like that colour, I like that person. We don't even have to think about it because through probably years of hardwired evolution, our brains, or the brain in humans, has learned through natural selection what is the best particular thing in any area we're looking at. So it tells us what we like, what we find tasty with food and stuff like that. We don't really have to make that decision, although we think sometimes that we do. There's the one question this is leading to, which I'd like to then talk about with both of you, a story from 1966 in Texas. There was a guy, a 25-year-old guy called Charles, I think his name was Charles Whitman, and he was an ordinary guy, quite intelligent, going about his work. He was married, lived with his wife Kathy. Well, one day, it was actually the 1st of August in 1966, apparently, he, with a huge trunk of rifles, guns, ammunition, and so on, went to the University of Austin, the tower. He went up in the lift to the top floor, and eventually he exited onto the roof. But before he did, he shot dead the receptionist, and then there were other tourists sort of coming out into where he was. He shot them, didn't all die, some of them did, including a pregnant lady. He went to the roof and he was taking pot shots at people below. Well, of course, after pretty quick police action, he was shot dead, but he left the suicide note. And I'd just like to read you that suicide note. But before I do, I tell you that 13 people were shot dead, he killed, and 33 were badly wounded. Let me ask you, before I tell you what his suicide note, because he knew he'd be shot dead, it was death by cop, I suppose. What sentence would you give to him? I'll ask you first, Cuz. For what he did, what would your appropriate sentence be for him?
Well, it would be 13 accounts of first-degree murder, and however many accounts of attempted murder, I suppose. I may even put that on trial by insanity, but then that depends on the disclosure of the suicide note.
Yeah,
that would be my...
The leader of our gang will make the show go with a bang and fund the aim of everything Custis. And fund the aim of everything Custis.
I may even put that on trial by insanity, but then that depends on the disclosure of the suicide note.
Yeah,
that would be my...
So what would you say? Okay, there's the suicide note, but purely on the basis of all those murders and it clearly gone crazy. What would you give him the death penalty if you believe in the death penalty, or would you say life in prison with no parole?
Do you know what? I suppose it depends, and I suppose this is a point that we're going to get to. I suppose it depends on his level of remorse. Now, for somebody who doesn't have remorse, then yeah, absolutely, death penalty. For somebody who has remorse, I think it's much more of a punishment to make them live with that remorse rather than just to execute them. So, yeah, I suppose it'd depend on how they portray themselves within the court setting as to whether I'd give them the death penalty or not. But certainly 13 accounts of murder would never be getting out of prison.
No. Okay. What about you, Cuz?
Well, I'd base it on things that we've seen. So, for instance, somebody's tried to commit suicide and it's been stopped. They don't then go ahead to try to commit suicide again. Well, some of them don't. Most of them don't. Some of them do come to appreciate life afterwards. They think, you know what, I had a lucky escape there. You know, I don't know what went wrong. You know, I hit rock bottom, and you know, I just thought end it all, and that's why I got there. Right. So I would approach it from that perspective, and I would, well, provided he's not being shot dead, because he might be trying to shoot at the police, and the police would definitely, you know, shoot back. It's the rule. So, for instance, if he was captured, if that were the case, I would, if I was the judge, I would recommend that he be put in an institution where he can get the help that he needs, because I don't think there's any amount of punishment that would bring back 13 lives. I don't think any punishment would bring back one life anyway. I don't think it would suffice for the taking of one life, let alone 13 lives. And so on that angle, I would put him where he would get the needed help, because I think it's unnatural for anyone to do such a thing, provided he isn't driven by some ideology. And I'm not going to go into that, but I suppose people can work out what it means. It's not, if he's not been driven by any ideology, then I would put him in a mental.
Of our gang will make the show go with a bang and fund the aim of everything Custis. And fund the aim of everything Custis.